Yes, it's time for The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour with us. Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast. How are you, sir? Happy New Year to Régis Le Sommier.
Happy New Year to you too.
Of the news magazine Paris Match. Also with us, Craig COPETAS of Quartz and The Atlantic. And Claude Guibal, senior correspondent for Radio France and France Culture Radio. We'll be talking later on about your latest trip abroad to Haiti. That'll be a little bit later on during the show The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag TWTW. This week, a major pivot by France's president, a packed house for François Hollande's New Year's press conference, where he scrapped his tax the rich mantra and instead offered major tax breaks and belt tightening. But looking at the Financial Times' take, that doesn't seem to be what the nearly 600 journalists came for. I thought of having an affair, but I couldn't get my moped to start, says the bank's cartoon there. It's Christopher Dickey. This was a major policy speech, but it's not what the journalists came for.
No, and in fact, there were moments in this 2-hour and 12-minute press conference where it was so stultifyingly boring that we began to wonder if the whole affair story wasn't some sort of bait to lure us there to pay attention in the first place. Because, in fact, although it was billed as this great economic speech, that's what he wanted people to pay attention to. The truth is that most of the measures are not particularly radical measures. They're things he's going to have to do anyway. He hasn't embraced sort of free market capitalism the way the markets would like to see him do. And so everybody was waiting just for the other shoe to fall, or the pants to drop, or whatever, in terms of the story of his affair.
You say that, but Claude Guibal, 4 million households, which for that time of day is huge, watched the press conference.
Yeah, they watched the press conference because they were waiting for a coming out. They had it. But as a social liberal, actually, I don't agree with you. It was quite radical, actually. It broke a taboo, you know. I guess it's the first time a socialist speaks about, you know, like supply, demand, production, productivity. Oh my God, this is much more than a love affair, you know?
Incredibly primitive French socialism is. I mean, you know, we all respect the motives of the socialists, but their sense of the way the market works is just totally bizarre. And I think you can see that with the president's remarks.
All right, we'll listen to some of those remarks on economic policy in a moment. By the way, the polls saying Régis Le Sommier, 31% found him convincing. Doesn't sound like much, but it's 9 points better than the last time he staged a press conference in September. And 58% said he was right to avoid talking about his private life.
Well, that's the very bizarre dilemma in between the French, that they're so interested in what their president's private life is, and in fact, when they're being asked, they say, oh, he should keep it private. That's a bit ironical, I would say.
They're buying your magazine.
Yeah, they buy the magazine and they say we shouldn't expose the private life of our president. That's the
hypocrisy, you would say.
Well, the cover
irony.
The cover of your magazine, Paris Match, this week has François Hollande and the First Lady, Valérie Trierweiler, on the cover.
Absolutely. Well, we decided to.
Trierweiler, who we should say is a journalist for Paris Match.
She is, and we decided to tell the story about the couple, about how what happened on the Palais de l'Élysée between those two. We spoke about the affair, of course, and we decided to go in to tell it in a way of explaining how such a position, how the couples in the Palais de l'Élysée gets a lot of pressure. That there is and their character also, like Valérie is this woman who's very, very fighting and bursting a lot, and Hollande has this round personality, and how at first they matched, and then they went different ways, separate ways. So we decided to focus on that mainly, and I think that there's a lot of question by the public about what happened and why they separated or their path went different ways.
58% said the president was right not to talk about his private life, but has your magazine sold well?
We don't know the figures yet.
Oh, of course.
I'll tell you, and I could tell you next week if you
Even I
want.
bought a copy.
Yeah.
What?
Even I bought a copy.
I got two.
You got two? Wow, nice.
Craig Capitas, the very first question at that press conference was, is Valérie Trierweiler still the First Lady? The President said, I'm not going to answer it today, but I will before a state visit to Washington on February the 11th.
Well, he should have answered it for the simple reason that the French taxpayer funds her office at the Élysée Palace as the First Lady of France. There is a political component here. The tragedy of this is that as much as we smile and snark at, you know, mocking and ridiculing and the humiliation of François Hollande on a global stage, this is not the way the president of a country should act, and particularly at a time when this country is in dire straits economically.
But the argument, Craig, was that if he did address it, then the whole 2 hours and 20 minutes would have been just on that.
Well, no, he could have shut it off. Again, Hollande, I know I use this term all the time, but he's a graduate student. He is not a professional politician. He is weak. He does not know how to lead a conversation. He has been woeful as a president of the French Republic and leading this country out of the doldrums. Francois, last year, by the government's own statistics, 60,000 companies in this country went out of business. That is shocking. These are the issues that France and Hollande as leader needs to put his hands around, and they're not doing it.
Claude Guibal, do you agree on that?
I think he tried to speak about that during this press conference, actually. But I agree with you that, you know, this should not be a topic. I mean, who cares? I mean, he hasn't done anything illegal in having
The problem is
affair. I mean, we're not talking about Dominique Strauss-Kahn, you know, being accused of a crime, you know. But
no, it's not that. It's the problem. I mean, I think that Craig used the appropriate word, which is ridicule.
yeah,
I mean,
ridicule.
he has
I
made
agree.
himself ridiculous. Nobody else made him ridiculous.
Is he ridiculous?
No, I mean, his image is, of course, badly damaged on the worldwide stage. But there's been precedent. I mean, talk about Bill Clinton. Talk about, you know, I mean,
made himself ridiculous.
Yeah, and was America ridiculous for that? And was the
But
the
this
Clinton
discussion
years
is not
were
about
the
Bill
Clinton
Clinton.
years that bad
It's
after
different
all
in the
because of
United
Monica
States.
Lewinsky scandal?
It's
I'm
different.
not sure.
It's different in the United States, Régis, because it's a different DNA over there. The French
But it's the same type of
French
story.
Imperium, by definition, the Élysée Palace, les maisons sans fenêtres, by definition, makes itself to be higher above the people, that they are supposed to have a greater wisdom.
So he's
That-
supposed to act regalian.
He's supposed to act with some common sense instead of going around, you know, going back to the Middle Ages and enforcing this kind of the droit de seigneur, that he can go into a bar and say, hi, I'm the president of the Republic. You want to go out on a date? He put himself on a pedestal to be mocked in the world at a time where he doesn't need it. And anyone who lives in this country, I don't know anyone, despite whether they want to talk about this or they think he's responsible, everyone has been hurt and chagrined by this. Every person in the street I've spoken with, they're outraged by this.
Look, I mean, it's a question. He needs credibility. I mean, France, to put it simply, France needs a leader, not a lover, right now. And his credibility.
But there's no good time to
And
fall
his
in
cr-
love.
and his
or
credit-
to change, whatever.
I think you can put
There's
that.
a bad time
I think
for
you
that
can put that on hold when they elect your
French touch.
president. You know, and if you can't put it on hold, if you can't.
So
Claude
Claude
Guibal,
Guibal,
I won't go there.
Claude Guibal, do you agree with Craig that the problem isn't having an affair? The problem is being photographed wearing a motorcycle helmet and sneaking out of the presidential palace.
Why are you asking this question to the only woman?
I'm
in the
asking you
studio?
because we've asked everyone else around the table.
No, I think, as you said, that France needs a leader, not a lover, as you said, and a president. I mean, the president's status compels him to a kind of exemplarity, of course. But I'm not talking about morals or everything. You know, what he does is his private life. Being photographed
Absolutely.
is a problem. more than, what he's doing is not my business.
And
but
those photographs being published is also the problem, this time around, because usually there's been, in the French press, a tendency to be shy about publishing these stories. And I remember, and I'm going to give this example because when Paris Match in 1994 published the first picture of François Mitterrand's illegitimate child, Mazarine Pinjot, it was a shock at the time. We were accused of having crossed the red line, if there ever were a red line, by the way. But people tend to believe that we shouldn't talk about it, and there was an outrage, even by our colleagues at the time. I remember that, and now it's part of history, and because we crossed that red line. Then it's changed. It changed something, and it was even worse at that time because in fact, François Mitterrand was actually raising another family outside his own with the public money.
That was with public money.
Mitterrand,
This time around,
difference.
I mean, I don't think
Mitterrand was a leader.
What?
Mitterrand was a leader, whether you like Mitterrand or not politically.
But come on,
Francois
Craig,
Francois Mitterrand, if he wanted to have sex with a cantaloupe, go right ahead. The point of it is that Mitterrand came across as a real leader, whether you liked him or not. And that's what Hollande doesn't have, any leadership qualities. And it makes him easier to be mocked.
I think but the other thing is we don't have to go back to 94. We don't have to go back to all those red lines to see where this came from. If you look back to the summer of 2012, you'll see all these headlines and covers of magazines saying that the peopleization of news had begun, that the red lines had all been crossed. Why? Because Valérie Trierweiler sent a tweet supporting the opponent of Hollande's ex-partner. And it was precisely this duel of the ladies, as it was called, that opened the door on all of his relationships, and also that made Trierweiler very unpopular.
I agree.
All right, Hollande's affair could be good for the economy. Already one car rental company cashing in on it with an ad campaign urging him to forego the scooter and instead, there it is, pick next time a car, it says. And good rates, it seems. Meanwhile, it was Berlin to the rescue of the French president on Wednesday with the German foreign minister touting the importance of Hollande's tax incentives.
First of all, what the French president presented yesterday is courageous. And secondly, in my opinion, the reporting on it did not get the attention it merited because of other topics which were allegedly more interesting.
Allegedly more interesting. We know where Frank-Walter Steinmeier stands on that. Claude Guibal making the point earlier that it was a big deal. Hollande announcing 30 billion euros in payroll tax cuts. That's a huge sum. And 50 million in cost cutting over 3 years. But most importantly, the French president unafraid to use a word that socialists in the past have sometimes shied away from. He said, "I am a social democrat."
Am I a social democrat? Yes. This responsibility pact is a form of social compromise. Therefore, it is a social democratic pact. If being on the left meant just increasing deficits, then those who governed before me were the extreme left.
Régis SOMMIER, people who live outside of France perhaps don't get this, but for a socialist to say, "I'm a social democrat."
Yeah, it's very important because there's a sense of conservatism, I'd say, within the Socialist Party and the French left about this doctrine and the fact that social democrats have always tend to be something, it exists in Germany, it exists outside of France, but so there was a sort of policy to say we're socialist. And I think it's important, the choice of word. Now, that said, François Hollande has never been somebody of the extreme left. I mean, he was always, he started his career with Delors. He was pro-European, he was pro-market before there was, the Socialist Party was very much tied to the left. So I don't think that's his true being, I say. There's nothing really surprising. Now, the fact of saying it makes it a little different.
And in fact, Claude Guibal, he's gotten more flack from the far left after this press conference than he has from business leaders or from the opposition conservatives.
Even if they are still waiting for acts, what they say, now he has just said things, but...
Well, I think the word that the British press used to describe his proposals is appropriate. They call it corporatist. They say, what's this responsibility pact? Somehow the government is going to reduce these taxes if business will hire more people. So whose business? Who are you going to negotiate with? MEDEF? I mean, the organization? I mean, who is going to hire more people? The idea that there's a market mechanism, that you make it easier for people to fire so that they can hire, is something he's not talking about and isn't going to talk about.
Look, Hollande, if you take the time to look, is not really a socialist. He is a mercantilist. He wants the government's hand in the ownership, management, and stewardship of every company and individual in this country. This goes back to Colbert and Louis XIV. As for what he said, yeah, you could look it up. As for what he said, it reminds me of, we all have kids. And you know when you get called into the principal's office because your son or daughter isn't doing well, and the principal says, you know, you're failing, and your son or daughter looks up and says, well, I promise to do better now. And the principal or the teacher looks back and say, well, let's see in 6 months. And more often than not, teachers will tell you that change doesn't happen. And I think that's precisely what's going on.
Lowering payroll taxes is a big deal.
Let me
it's
see
what
it.
Everyone's been asking for.
Yeah, asking, and they're still asking. I want to see
Still
it.
waiting to see it happen.
We want to see it happen. You know, the great thing about...
That's why it's a pact.
Yeah, you know, the great thing about France is that we have these exhilarating and ultimately useless philosophical discussions on economics, particularly as all comes out of the Élysée Palace under the socialists. But as I say, in the end, they're ultimately useless because we never see anything. It's a never-ending discussion where everything, as they say, is en principe, in principle, in principle, in principle. Well,
right,
the markets want to see it in fact.
All right, and when we come back, we'll see how this argument is playing out on both sides of the English Channel. Stay with us.